David. Here we are again.
Michelle, so good to see you again. How long has it been?
It's been ages. We ended the last one on quite a interesting note. So I would love to kind of just jump in straight from the mastery perspective. Our theme in the Wisdom Seekers this month is mastery. You're all about mastery. Um, and this aspect of we have forgotten. This is something that has fascinated me a lot. I, it's there's different elements to it. Different people look at it from different perspectives and different sides and angles. Um, but the basis is there. We have chosen um, this experience at this time. I'm pretty sure in the evolution of the universe. Um, how do you actually you said something very interesting when we spoke before, and you said you wrote this book, Swords of Illumination, as a reminder for the next time round.
Yes.
So tell me more. Tell me, how do you think we can help remind ourselves in this process? Because I agree, we have choices to a point. Um, you know, people in Palestine don't really feel necessarily that they had a choice in the situation, or in Ukraine, or in Syria, or so it's difficult to. It's one thing for us to talk about it from this perspective. Um, it's not such a nice perspective for many others. Um, how do we marry this all as a collective consciousness, because we influenced by each other and by um, our own, what we experiencing, what others experience in the world at this time.
Again, going for the small stuff right away. What's amazing about this is that in this physical plane, what we're dealing with as human beings is something called pressure. So we have this amazing ability to create meaning with things. We've been given this from God, right, with permission. Every cultural story that you've ever read around the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, the words were given to these two to be able to name things. When you name something, you give meaning to them. So
Mm,
right from the beginning of all of our stories, we have the power of giving things meaning.
mm,
So that meaning, though, let's push that aside, knowing that we fully well have that. While
mm,
we're here, though, that meaning can be shifted, we've found, through man-made pressure or
mhm,
human pressure
mm,
and supernatural pressure. For example, if you tend to ascend into the clouds, there's this natural pressure that we have to deal with when we get into airplanes.
mhm,
Jump in a submarine or scuba dive like I do, you're going to be dealing with natural pressure.
mhm,
But there's this natural pressure to forget. We're swimming in this frequency, energy, or forgetfulness juice, an
mm,
ocean of it called Maya energy.
mm,
It actually has a term, Maya energy, not Gaia
mhm,
energy, which is the frequency and universal force of the planet, but
mm,
Maya energy.
mm,
And this ocean of forgetfulness is designed for one purpose, to allow you to forget who you are, divinity, so
mm,
that you can experience who you've chosen to be.
mm,
If you remember, Michelle, truly, if you really remembered who you really are, divinity, the
mm,
game would be up. There would be nothing for you here, because you would then know you are everything here and everything's going to run beautifully and smoothly and there's no way to lose at this thing.
mm.
But coming into that and forgetting your divinity is a necessary step to the experiential field of this physical plane.
Yeah.
It must happen for you to have an experience, because we just talked about this earlier in our earlier session. Without up, there is no down. Without left, there is no right. This law of contrast that exists here. But in order for it to be effective, you've got to forget the game.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to bring you back to Maya, I love Maya, because Maya is she was the oldest sister in the Pleiades as well, in myth. So she was the mother of Hercules,
Yeah.
and and there's a magic about her. That's what the month May was named after, the goddess Maya. Um so there is this ultimate connection always around us, and it's almost for me like the universe gives us these little clues every now and then to go, oh, remember this, feeling or aspect to the bigger part of you. um and it feels a lot like a game sometimes,
It does.
because we chose into that, I think. Yeah.
Yes. And it's
Yeah.
probably the best way to articulate it, even though it doesn't feel like that sometimes. Believe me, some really dark times in my life, which have been so surface level. When you talk about world events going on, my life has been compared to that easy. Yet, I will tell you that there's been some adventures in my life that I wouldn't want to share with anyone, especially with the dynamics with my father and I. It was very physically, emotionally, mentally challenging for sure. Hospital multiple times. And we survived together and we healed the work between us, but that created a brand new experience for me.
Mm.
And this part of this work is to understand that when you come in this experience world and you get to a level of mastery, I thought, Michelle, once I got to a level of spiritual mastery, no bad things would ever happen to me again. I was a perfect Jedi and I could just use the force and stop the bullets. And that's not how this place works. As a matter of fact, oftentimes on your path to mastery, at least from my own personal experience, I was actually calling forth universal pressure so that I could understand experientially who I am. Because if I keep experiencing the same things over and over again, there's no pressure. I got this. It's easy. It's when the unexpected pressure comes up and I remain who I've chosen to be is where I evolve. And I truly have the next level of experience. So going from good to great to extraordinary to elite to legendary to greatest of all time, you'll definitely notice a trend with those people that we admire on this planet is that they have one singular thing in common. They know who they are and they don't let anyone talk them out of it, including themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's the pressure element, so they can also remove themselves from the pressure, as it's almost like it doesn't become a personal thing.
Right.
Yeah, because of
No,
that choice.
doesn't represent who they are. They're not
Mm.
choosing to let those effects of those pressures do that to them.
Mm.
For example, we work with a lot of attorneys. And we had a client that was coming in that was freaking out. They'd just gotten their first subpoena, they got in their first lawsuit. And by the way, if you've never had that experience, it's not fun. It's like shocking, right?
Yeah.
And so we're sitting down with our client and we introduce them to one of our referrals or attorneys. And this person's going, and by the way, we're sweating over here. And like he's telling us the story, and the attorney's not reacting at all. And it was like, what is happening here? Why is that person not freaking out? And then the attorney says, oh yeah, you do this, this, and this, and here's what we're gonna do, and we're gonna do this. And 5 seconds was like, here's the whole strategy and story about how we're gonna deal with that. Like it didn't affect them in a pressure situation at all. What was going on? That attorney had been through this experiential pressure multiple times, hundreds, if not thousands of times. Like it was just like breathing. Yet for us, though, we were experiencing it for the first time. And things are always harder in the first time. But once you have that experience, you then learn how to deal with pressure. So experience and pressure tend to go together. And the other thing that goes along with that is your experience in dealing with pressure, and the higher levels of pressure you can deal with and not have it implode on you, like take away or sell your soul or just to be able to get something out of life. You remain who you are, that you stay intact. Your integrity is there. Your authenticity is created by that. And also your value in this physical plane is created, because we tend to value people who deal with high levels of pressure and don't fold under the pressure. Now, all your soul can deal with any pressure whatsoever. There is no pressure in this physical plane that it cannot deal with. It's the difference, the separation between our soul and who we've created ourselves at, that creates this unbelievable feeling and experience that feels really real to us, as the pressure that tends to make us implode or flourish. So going back to this identity thing again, that is the most important thing that I've known so far. By creating that deliberately, consciously, with intention, is what then goes to your next question, attracts your destiny to you.
And what is destiny? Tell me.
Ah.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, if you think about the world, there's actually a term in quantum mechanics called the world of pure potentiality,
Hmm.
where everything exists in this place.
Yeah.
And I've experienced this personally, but I experienced it through other people. One of the people I admired so much was a guy named John Denver. John
Mm.
Denver was a
Music.
huge
Yeah.
star, right, in
Yeah.
America in the 70s. Now I'd missed, my the Elvis Presley because I was a little
Yeah.
bit, too young for that. But John Denver coming in, he was on stage, he was in music, he was from the country, I was from the South, kind of stuff. He had this angelic voice that was just, it was mesmerizing. Every time he sang, I couldn't stop what I was doing, and I had to listen to this guy
Mm.
playing the guitar. And just, he was in movies. I mean, he was a true superstar. It's like our Taylor Swift that we hear about today, right? In the 70s, that was the guy. He was everywhere.
Yeah.
And in an interview on the Dick Cavett show, I remember Dick Cavett was one of those late night spokes,
Yeah.
people that does those interviews.
Yeah.
And he said something really remarkable. I remember watching this as a kid. I don't remember how old I was, but he was asked a question. It was like, how did you write this song? How did you write, Country Roads?
Mm.
And he sat for just a brief moment and he says, I was just sitting out there in my backyard in Denver, Colorado. And actually, I think he was up in Aspen is where he actually lived. But I was living out I was actually out in my backyard, and this song just came to me. And he just said it very matter of factly. And the way he said it resonated so completely, it reminded me of my divinity. When he
Mm.
said it, when something resonates with you, that's because the words that are being said remind you of who you really are, right? Resonance. And it just hit me in a way that I was like, what did he just say? And I was very confused. I didn't know what he meant by that, but I just kept listening to these interviews. And over again, I heard this constant theme. And that theme was, whenever I was listening to music, which is one of my favorite things to do, is that they kept saying this stuff. I just heard this tune, and just this speaking things.
Mhm.
Mozart was pretty famous for this.
Yeah.
And he was known to have written his entire, concerto or concerts and operas and everything without a single misplaced note. There
Mm.
was no corrections on his entire sheets of paper. And people were like, this is not possible, as if he were dictating, Michelle, from some place.
Mhm.
I believe in practical terms that places the world of pure potentiality. And you and I, as human beings, have unique access to that,
Yeah.
which means every song, every solution, every possibility, an idea already exists in that.
Mhm.
If I could find a way how to get myself to get into a certain frequency to connect with that source, I can download information from source.
Mhm.
How do I do that?
Yeah, show me how.
Tell me how. So that's been my
Yeah.
journey for the last 30 years, is figuring that out. And the swords of illumination are the elements that help you create your identity, self-created, consciously, soul-driven identity
Mhm.
that creates a frequency that
Mm.
allows you to connect to that source. That entire book was downloaded from that source. And I really mean that authentically. I
Yeah.
don't mean that I was like, oh, I'm so creative. I was in a space, my business partner was in a space, we wrote this and it just flowed through us.
Mm.
That's the magic of it. That's the book I wanted to write, because I knew that if I was writing myself a love letter to my next future life, as we,
Yeah.
talked about earlier, is like I was in such fear of coming back to this place and forgetting all the stuff I did. And I know I'm going to do it. Why not
Yeah.
have a reference point, right? So write a book, give yourself a love letter. That was pretty clever.
Yeah.
So now I can come back and read that book, or even more importantly, somebody else has read the book and had taken it to a whole nother level. And I come back and this person is coaching me or teaching me or mentoring me. Come on.
Mm.
I mean, if we're going to play
Yeah.
with this imagination, let's play, right? Because we're making all this
Exactly.
stuff up, is one of the phrases that spiritual masters have said to us. Well,
Mhm.
then make it up big.
Yeah. If you're gonna do it properly.
Let's go. Go
Yeah.
big or go home, right?
Yeah. Another phrase, and you just mentioned consciousness. Another phrase that kind of, or something you said in a different interview that I had a look at, was it's congruency, not consciousness. What do you mean by that? What tell me more.
So in spiritual terms, as I was going down the spiritual path, right, people were always telling me that I had to raise my level of consciousness. I had to be able to get to this spiritual awakening kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I was buying into this. I was like, okay, this is what I need to do. So how do I raise my consciousness?
Yeah.
And then I was going through this, and probably about 10 years into my journey, struggling, and I read a book by David Hawkins, Dr. David Hawkins, and his book about power versus force talks very specifically about this levels of consciousness. And he actually created a map of consciousness around human beings, right? 1,000 being the highest level of avatar, all the way down to 0 kind of stuff, very no level of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting about it is that if I'm divinity, then I'm going to have my level of consciousness I've already chosen before coming in here.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very clear that your level of consciousness can only go up about 5 points while you're in this physical plane, because you've chosen to come in with a certain level of consciousness to have an experience of what that level of consciousness is. So
Okay.
before coming into this physical plane, you made a choice.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm going to be at 200. That's going to be my max. Now, don't get me wrong. You can go way down to 60 if you wanted to, but you got from 0 to 200. 205 is going to be your max, but you've already chosen that to be a mutable thing. This is not going to change for you.
Mm-hmm.
So our levels of consciousness now, levels of consciousness was why I was programmed that that's going to change the world. I've got to raise my consciousness. And yet I was getting very clear information that resonated with me that I was not able to raise this above a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
So I was watching this whole thing happen. I was like, man, that person over there isn't very highly conscious, but they're doing really well in this physical plane.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start taking a look at some of the world scale leaders that we know that have been what most people would call evil,
Mm-hmm.
right? And evil isn't the high levels of consciousness we're talking about. It's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
How are they being so successful?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean that in just a very terrible way, as you can imagine, because they were living their intentions, hurting other people. How are they being successful at that?
Mm-hmm.
I was watching that. This had nothing to do with conscientiousness. It had to do with everything about being congruent, creating who they were, letting everyone around them, and then doing the things in this physical plane that connected to who they were and what they were doing. And that congruency is what I felt fascinating about, because like, holy crap, in this physical plane, not in the spiritual plane.
Mm-hmm.
Spiritual plane, it's about conscientiousness. But in the physical plane, it's being congruent with who you say you are, how you've designed that, the doingness that supports that, because you got to do the doingness. If I say I'm a world-class athlete and I sit over on the couch over there and eat Cheetos all day long, those two things don't go with each other, right? It's not
Yeah.
congruent.
Mm-hmm.
But watch successful people and you'll see the same theme that I was saying, that those people know who they are in that particular subject.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor Swift, unbelievable on stage. She knows who she is. She controls that environment. She went against the big dogs. She survived all this stuff. I don't care if she's a woman or not. She's divinity on stage.
Oh yeah.
She knows this.
Yeah.
In other areas, though, she probably struggles, but it's just the same model. She knew who she was, like she does on stage, and created that in her other aspects of life. Her life would be very different, like yours and I would. Because there's certain areas of our life we're really good in because we know who we are. We can't be talked out of it. And there's other areas where complete disasters, including mine. I've got to work on getting clear about who I am so I can have that experience of that, called being successful or not being frustrated or not being stressed. But that is by design of creating this level of identity, and the work that goes along with it creates a level of congruency, which over time creates this level of trust, which over time creates authenticity and a place called centeredness. We talk a lot about this in the book as well.
And that person that you choose to create, as you say, is congruent, but also in the different aspects. So I need to be that in all facets of my life. I can't be a different person to different people, or show up in different spaces in different ways, because that would be an energy drain, I feel always. Does that go with the congruency? Are we, can we be consistently ourselves?
Right. And remember, well, let's just get down to it. So right down to the bottom line. If you are truly divinity, as I believe we are, that's who we are when we come into this physical plane.
Mm.
As soon as you enter this physical plane, anything you put after the word I am divinity, anything after that, Michelle, is a belief about who you are.
Mm.
I am divinity as far as you can go with an identity statement in spiritual terms, because you are the light. You are everything. You are part of everything. There is nothing that is not connected to you. But in this physical plane, you enter a world that creates an illusionary concept, a place where you can then come and experience an individualized part of that.
Mm.
So in that is where you start moving into this congruency thing.
Mm-hmm.
So doing things here that says, for example, there's a lot of folks that say, hey, you shouldn't be dressed as a corporate person speaking about spirituality. That's exactly what we need to be doing. We need to be integrating these things, because if we don't start having some of these spiritual concepts things coming from our soul, then a lot of the problems that we created with our ego are never going to be solved, because the energy that it took, the source that it took, ego, to create the problem is not the source, thought, or energy or frequency that's going to solve the problem.
Yeah. Einstein got that one too.
You nailed it.
He
Beautiful.
did, yeah.
So if we continue to solve problems created by the ego, solved by the ego, we're in the mess we are. We've got to start being a different source to be able to start overcoming some of the big challenges we face on the planet. And they are real. There's no doubt about those.
Yeah. On all levels, and spiritual and physical at the same time. It is very real. And it's not always easy, is it? It's sometimes I wrote about it the other day around, choosing your heart, as to it is a challenge often to just be that person that you have decided to create, because there isn't always validation. It doesn't always it never comes from outside. It shouldn't, but that inner well of resources sometimes feel a little bit shallow, and you're allowed to get frustrated or tired or anything in between, and then you pick yourself up and you carry on again, and be that congruent you, which isn't the same as any other person, soul, creative. We're all creatives. We all create our reality. People always think I'm crazy when I talk about we can create our reality, and it is not always the reality. It grows, and it evolves with us constantly. That's why I love the spiral imagery, and that energy that brings as well. It is a process, but it's also experiencing the experience of experiencing life, is the choice we made, I think. I hope.
And to go back to your original question around choice around this thing, is that, let's say, for example, I'm going out to a nightclub. And I'm clear about who I am. I'm going to go party and I'll have a good time, and I'll have some fun with my friends and stuff like this. And that behavior is who I am, right? Oh, I'm doing the nightclub thing. And then I take that same behavior and I walk into a church. Uh-oh. I've got to. Now, here's the interesting thing. Because in the physical realm, we often correlate behaviors with who I am. This is the challenge, because if you start correlating that who you are is your behaviors, then nothing can change. If I identify as I am a smoker, I work with a lot of folks that have a lot of addiction stuff that says, if I'm a smoker and that's your identity about who you are, giving up that is like giving up part of your soul. It's giving up who you are. So when that identity becomes authentic with the behavior, that's a very tough thing to change. So behaviors aren't necessarily who you are, because you know this. You've done one of those things, right? Where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I did that. Oh, that's not who. And we have that. So being able to see clearly that your behaviors are not who you are, unless they are, is a divine dichotomy of things. to this and that. And
Yeah.
it's confusing to the brain sometimes,
Yeah.
but not to the spirit, not to your soul. It makes very clear sense that this place, but that takes some work to reconnect with your soul, to have the articulation I just said make sense to you. Because if you use your ego to interpret what I just said, you can't hear it. I couldn't hear it. For years, I couldn't hear it. But my soul can hear it effortlessly.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think that's a perfect way to kind of bring this to a, hopefully not an end, just a pause into a next conversation soon, I hope. Thank you so much. There is a lot of wisdom in there. I am going to integrate and think about all of this quite a bit. I really love the illusion of contrast. That is something that I think is, in art, in music, in all of those beautiful things. It's the contrast that shows us the beauty a little bit more. So it makes
One last thing around mastery, then, just to be able
yeah.
to end that, is that my understanding of the best definition I've ever heard of mastery was a master seeks to understand.
Mm-hmm.
When you understand the law of contrast, everything else starts to make sense. Just from a level of understanding, not comprehension or application, just for understanding that these things exist for your benefit. And then be able to say, how do I actually use them as opposed to them using me?
Yeah. And that is true mastery, definitely.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you endlessly.
Absolutely.
Thank you.